the BBC news sites that are related to each other. So the first one we can see here, it says that the European Court rules that human rights were violated by climate inaction. So if we have a look at the article here, this is actually a court case that was taken by some people in Switzerland. So it says that a group of older Swiss women have won the first ever climate case victory in the European Court of Human Rights. They're in the 70s, and they said that because of their age and their gender, I think they mean sex there, made them particularly vulnerable to the effects of heat waves that are linked to climate change. And then we can see a bit further down, it says that the Swedish campaigner Greta Thunberg joined activists at the court in Strasbourg. I think, yeah, she's in that picture above. I'm not really sure what relevance Greta Thunberg has got, really. I mean, she's obviously an activist, but by her own admission, her autism means that she sees things in black and white, and she claims that that's a superpower. Well, actually, because the world is very complex, and if you're going to try and tackle CO2 emissions, there are a lot of issues around costs and benefits and trade-offs. It's really not that straightforward, and it's certainly not a superpower to be able to say, well, the science says that CO2 emissions are affecting the climate and leading to increased global temperatures. Okay, so we go a bit further down, yes. I mean, the first thing to point out about these older women, of course, is that, well, they've won this victory, but it's not actually going to make any difference to their lives anyway, because CO2 emissions are still pretty much climbing. They do actually talk about this further down this article, so it goes on to give some details about what the court case was about and what the implications are. And then if we go down to this bit here, so one of these ladies has said that we know statistically in 10 years we will be gone, so whatever we do now, we're not doing it for ourselves but for the sake of our children and our children's children. Well, whatever Switzerland does with its CO2 emissions, or even the EU as a whole, isn't necessarily going to make any difference and stop heat waves, because there's a big bad world out there, and there's a lot more countries than in the EU, and countries like China and India, not that they're bad countries, but they're increasing the number of coal-fired power stations. So even in a few decades, it's doubtful whether any of this action as a result of this European court case is going to make any difference or measurable difference to global temperatures, and whether there's heat waves in Switzerland. One interesting thing actually is that in the UK, the Office for National Statistics has calculated that over the last 20 years in the UK, warming has actually reduced the number of deaths, because even though heat deaths may have increased a bit, cold deaths have more than offset that, and it makes you wonder whether that would actually be the case for Switzerland. So it's another example that even if this did make any difference at all to global temperatures, there are always trade-offs involved. The bottom of the article actually then goes on to come up with the usual thing. The BBC always has to kind of stick this sort of thing in there, that scientists and activists say that progress is too slow and the world is not on track to meet the crucial target of limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. But actually, if we look at another article in a minute, we can see that 1.5 degree threshold has actually been exceeded already. And from what I've read, maybe anybody can correct me, actually the 1.5 degrees is actually a political figure rather than something of genuine scientific substance. So if we go to this other article here, so it's saying that the climate change, they're quoting somebody saying we're in uncharted territory, fears after a record hot March. So if we look down here, it's saying that March this year, was the warmest on record, extending a run to monthly temperature records to 10 in a row. So one thing to point out here, pardon me, so it says March 2024 was 1.68 degrees warmer than pre-industrial times. So given that there simply wasn't sufficient weather stations of the accuracy that we've got now in early industrial times, if they're talking about temperature record on record, then it's absolutely ludicrous to talk about temperatures in either hundredths of a degree or even tenths of a degree. We could certainly say we think it's warmer, but to put such an exact figure on it is, it's really silly. You can pretty much guarantee that it's not 1.68 degrees. Simply because, in fact, even now, certain weather stations, or perhaps all of them, have a margin of error anyway. And certainly, this article and most articles I read like this do not actually talk about any kind of margin of error, whether it would be plus or minus a certain amount, whether it's tenths of a degree or more for these global average temperature calculations. So it's the usual thing here, talking about how it's been record temperatures. Now, the one thing that caught my eye is that the scientists don't seem to understand why it's been particularly warm. So it says here that temperatures began breaking records by a particularly large margin around last September, when the El Nino was still developing. But that can't explain all of the extra warmth. Now, we are told that the science is settled, but I presume that's actually just in the sense that CO2 emissions supposedly effectively act as a dimmer switch on global temperatures, because clearly this admission means that there are aspects of the climate that are still not fully understood. That's hardly surprising. We're not gods at the minute. We don't fully understand something as complex as a climate. Going on to say they're still trying to understand why the situation changed so dramatically. Some images there showing the El Nino effects. And then it says that cooling sea ice would normally see a temperature drop in global air temperatures, but it remains to be seen exactly how this will evolve. So it seems that there's certainly a fair amount of unknowns within the climate. If we look at this thing here now in terms of global CO2 emissions, if my tablet will load it. As usual, I'll put all the URLs in the video description. So we can see here that even though places like Europe and the US, the CO2 emissions are starting to fall, or have been falling for a little while, there are still parts of the world such as China, other parts of Asia there, including in India further up, where actually the emissions are increasing. So there's no point in these people on this article here, getting excited about their victory at the European Court of Human Rights, because it's almost certain that over the next several decades, if the climate science is right about the impact of CO2, any small effects of Europe or Switzerland itself reducing their CO2 emissions is not going to reduce. It's not going to stop overall CO2 emissions, and we've already obviously had 150 years or so of cumulative emissions. So they talk about wanting to do this for their children and grandchildren, but it's really not clear whether whether it will make any difference at all. Um, as usual, the big thing with climate change is it's easy to diagnose a problem, assuming that the science is correct, but actually, how you actually decide to deal with that problem is another matter. There's so many questions and complexities involved in that.